Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're zooming way in to look at the microscopic science behind why so many people struggle to digest dairy. Okay, let's kick things off with a slightly provocative thought. What if all that bloating and discomfort you experience after a bowl of cereal or a glass of milk wasn't actually from the milk sugar? What if it's from a hidden protein structure? We've all been blaming lactose for decades, right? But the science is pointing somewhere else entirely.
To uncover the real culprit here, we're going to follow a fascinating domino effect. We'll be hitting 6 main stops today: the single amino acid shift, BCM7, an exogenous opioid, leaky gut and systemic spread, antioxidants and brain impacts, who is most vulnerable, and finally, the clinical consensus. All right, let's get right into it. Section 1, the single amino acid shift.
So, we gotta look at the exact genetic mutation where all this trouble actually begins. If you look at position 67, casein makes up about 80% of cow's milk protein, by the way. Now, on the A1 side, we have a single amino acid substitution, histidine. Think of this like a giant bullseye for your digestive enzymes, or scissors. When you digest A1 milk, those scissors snip the protein right there, releasing this bioactive peptide. But look at the A2 structure. It has proline at that exact same spot. And that proline acts like a protective shield. It creates a physical roadblock, what scientists call steric hindrance. So the scissors get blocked and no peptide is released. It literally all hinges on this one tiny little shift.
Moving on to Section 2, BCM7, an exogenous opioid.
So the really crucial point here is understanding what actually happens when those scissors successfully snip the A1 protein. The fragment that breaks off is a peptide called beta-casein 7. We're just going to call it BCM7 for short. And you definitely need to know what this is, because it doesn't just pass through you, it structurally mimics your own endogenous endorphins. That means it functions as an exogenous opioid right inside your body. Yeah, you heard that right, an opioid from milk. Not exactly the morning buzz you're expecting from your cereal bowl, is it?
Think of this BCM7 peptide as a molecular key. Because of its unique shape, it locks perfectly into the mu-opioid receptors in both your enteric nervous system, so your gut, and your central nervous system, your brain. By turning that lock, it alters everything. It messes with your gut motility, changes your brain's neurotransmission, and can trigger local inflammation. It even induces morphine-like effects, like sedation in some cases.
Which brings us to Section 3, leaky gut and systemic spread. By activating those local opioid receptors we just talked about, A1 protein literally puts the brakes on your digestion. It severely delays your transit time. Your gut essentially turns into a slow-moving fermentation factory, and that elevates hydrogen levels and drives up intestinal inflammation. Meanwhile, the A2 protein, it just maintains normal, optimized motility, completely avoiding those functional discomforts. But honestly, the damage goes way deeper than just a slow digestive tract. A1 exposure, and specifically that BCM7 peptide, actively compromises the tight junctions of your gut lining. It literally creates a leaky gut scenario. You can see how pathogens from your gut microbiota can just slip right through that broken barrier and straight into your bloodstream. A2, on the flip side, acts as a supportive substrate. It secures that structural integrity and actually fosters a healthy microbial ecosystem, like beneficial bifidobacterium. And once that barrier is breached, well, that localized gut inflammation doesn't just stay in the gut. It spills over. It activates the Th2 pathway, which is your body's primary mechanism for allergic responses. This ramps up leukocyte infiltration and key inflammatory biomarkers. And that is exactly what severely exacerbates systemic allergies like eczema and asthma. Let's look at the systemic effects in Section 4, antioxidants and brain impacts. Okay, this mechanism is honestly kind of shocking. BCM7 directly blocks the cellular uptake of cysteine. Now, cysteine is the critical raw material, the absolute rate-limiting amino acid that your body needs to produce glutathione. By blocking cysteine right at the door, BCM7 completely shuts down the assembly line for your body's master antioxidant. And without glutathione, your cells are left completely defenseless against severe systemic oxidative stress. And remember that compromised leaky gut barrier we just looked at? Well, because of that enteric escape, these intact BCM7 peptides can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. This is known in the scientific literature as the opioid excess theory. Once they get into the central nervous system, they start antagonizing serotonin and dopamine receptors. Clinically speaking, elevated levels of intact BCM7 have actually been documented in the blood and urine of children with specific developmental delays and autism spectrum disorders. Now, with all these severe physiological reactions, you might be asking a very logical question.
Why doesn't everybody experience this massive disruption?
That takes us right into section 5. Who is most vulnerable?
Think of the susceptibility equation like a funnel. It perfectly demonstrates that our physiological response to A1 is absolutely not uniform across the population. Your unique reaction is entirely dependent on a specific biological filter. So it's not just about how much A1 you're drinking, it's about how your specific body handles that BCM7 digestion load as it drops into this funnel.
To quickly summarize that complex funnel, whether you safely process A1, having a high tolerance with minimal absorption, or whether you suffer severe systemic consequences, comes down to 3 main things. First, your DPP-4 enzyme activity, which actively degrades the peptide in your gut. Second, your intestinal barrier integrity, which physically blocks it from getting into your bloodstream. And third, your genetic receptor expression, which dictates your personal baseline opioid sensitivity. So, this brings us right back to our opening mystery. If you feel sick after drinking milk, are you absolutely 100% sure it's the lactose? Because here is the ultimate plot twist. A1 protein actually alters your gastric transit time, causing rapid gastric emptying. It forces this sudden, overwhelming lactose load into your colon all at once, which totally floods your limited lactase enzymes. And that is what causes the acute bloating and pain. A2 milk, on the other hand, gives you a slow, controlled, steady delivery of lactose that your digestive system can actually keep up with. A2 basically prevents that perfect storm, significantly reducing intolerance symptoms, totally regardless of the actual lactose content. And we have to note that certain populations are way more at risk here. Take infants, for example. Their immature intestinal barriers and developing enzymatic defenses make them exceptionally sensitive. In fact, conventional A1 cow's milk is strongly linked to chronic pediatric constipation and higher rates of respiratory infections. And on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have athletes who often rely on high-volume dairy for recovery. They're acutely vulnerable because A1 suppresses their antioxidant capacity and drives up gut inflammation exactly when they are facing high exercise-induced oxidative stress, which ultimately compromises their muscle function and recovery.
Let's wrap this all up in section 6, the clinical consensus. When you look across every single dimension, from slowing your GI motility to compromising your microbiota barrier, triggering Th2 immune and redox dysfunction, and even causing neurological disruption, A1 acts as a massive physiological disruptor in susceptible people. Meanwhile, the A2 alternative is consistently shown to just maintain your natural, healthy baseline across the board. So the clinical consensus is incredibly clear. We understand the mechanism of the BCM7 trigger, we understand the variance in who is vulnerable, and we have the solution. Simply removing the A1 trigger, basically switching exclusively to A2 dairy, acts as a non-invasive, highly effective dietary intervention. It definitively restores gastrointestinal comfort and actively supports your entire systemic immunological health. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, kind of provocative thought. If something as microscopic as one shifted amino acid at position 67 can completely rewrite your physiological baseline and cause this massive systemic domino effect, how much do you really know about the other foods you're eating every single day? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep asking questions about what fuels your body, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.